Hi guys. So here is chapter 10, key issue 3. Let me get this started. Here's Margie. Margie, say hi. Look at the camera. Well, she's busy, I guess. Or distracted. I think something's going on outside. Okay, so anywho, we are going to be talking about a lot of those maps that are in key issue 3. We're going to be talking about different styles of farming, different farming types, different bioclimatic zones. So I made you a chart for this rather than doing traditional lecture notes. I think that would be more helpful to you. You really do need to know all of these different types of farming, kind of what they look like, where they're practiced, what they're used for. So those would all be important things to make note of. That's why I'm having you do that chart. But I'm kind of just giving you, since your chart's really detail oriented, I'm giving you kind of an overview of what all of this means, like big picture. So, okay, agricultural regions are influenced by the natural environment, the climate, their soil quality and type, and what type of landforms that can either be utilized, or sometimes landforms can be a problem. Plant and animal production is dependent on climatic conditions, especially temperature. Amount of rainfall is also something that's really important. We talked about it a little bit last video, but certain crops require a certain climate or a certain amount of rainfall, where other crops maybe don't require a lot of rain. So all of that kind of makes those differences make different agricultural regions. Okay, so bioclimatic zones are separated by the amount of rainfall and the different altitudes. Okay, so the red here is a tropical climate, so really hot and humid. Okay, looks a lot like the bean belt, right? Coffee is kind of grown in that sort of climate. A dry climate, desert climate, so those are areas that don't get a lot of rainfall. I think this is supposed to be this color here, so that's where we're at, right? Not a lot of rainfall. Australia, also not a huge agricultural country because they have a very dry climate. Mild climates, like temperate climates, where it doesn't really get super cold. It stays relatively warm, but not necessarily hot, but plenty of rainfall. The green is continental climate, which is cold and humid, which is a terrible mixture, I think. It's like you get wet and then it's really cold, so you're even more cold. Great combination. And then polar climate, obviously not a lot grows there. Very, very cold, very, very dry. And then these white gaps are very mountainous climates. Okay. Okay, so something else I want to add is subsistence versus commercial agriculture and intensive versus extensive agriculture. But all of these also correspond to the bioclimatic zone, so I wanted to show you those first. Okay, so some of these climates are better, more conducive for growing crops than others, but mostly it just determines what type of crops you are going to grow if you're a farmer. Okay, so these maps should kind of be understood together, okay? And your map journals that we did do that same thing. There's a reason I wanted you to do it on the same map, okay? So this just shows you the different types of farming. So let's see. If we go back to like that tropical climate, in those areas, you see a lot of shifting cultivation, okay? A lot of some livestock ranching, lots of nomadic and semi-nomadic herding. So we're going to talk about those. Those are some ones that you are going to take notes on, okay? You'll see in the U.S., lots of livestock ranching, as I mentioned before. some mixed livestock and crop ranching. Livestock can exist at lots of different types of climate. That's why you'll notice it's kind of all over the place. Like, it does exist in colder climates, but then it also exists in warmer climates, as you can see as well. So livestock is something that's more about space really than climate, I would say. Okay, so we're going to go over these different types of farming, but just understand, like, so in a tropical climate, you're more likely to find shifting cultivation. So on your, what do you call it? The chart that I made you, I think it would be great to put some regions, like, I don't know, sub-Saharan Africa, but then also, like, say what bioclimatic zone it matches with, and I think that would be really, really helpful. Okay, so you just keep using these maps back and forth. They're both in your book as well. Okay, so there's two types of agriculture modern day. So there's subsistence agriculture and there is commercial agriculture. Subsistence agriculture is characterized by small farmers that basically grow food for their families. So it's enough for them to survive. They're not selling it. They're not using it to trade with other people. It's just they need to eat and they grow it, and that's what they grow it for. So this is more common in developing countries. Okay, so if you think back to the map where we looked at different caloric intakes around the world, those ones that have very small caloric intakes mostly are subsistence agriculture locations. Okay, commercial agriculture is when crops are grown for a profit. Okay, so this is where you're going to see those really large farms, like Foster farms for chickens. They use mechanization, lots of machines, and they're more common in the developed world. Okay, so difference between the two, make sure you know that. Subsistence, more common in LDCs, commercial, more common in MDCs. Then there's also intensive versus extensive agriculture. And every type that you guys are going to go over is either intensive or extensive. And sometimes it'll even break it up into like one style of farming that can be both intensive and extensive, and I'll kind of explain it to you. You'll see what I mean when you read the book. So intensive agriculture is often paired with subsistence farming, where there's a large amount of effort in order to produce the maximum yield. So it's intense when it comes to labor. Like, growing that crop is intensive. It takes a lot of manpower or lady power to do it, and it takes a long time. Like, it's back-breaking work. Sugarcane would be a good example of intensive agriculture. It's extremely difficult on your body to grow sugarcane. Okay? Extensive agriculture uses an extensive amount of land to produce the maximum yield. Okay, so you need a lot of space. So if you need a ton of space, extensive agriculture would be an example. The picture I chose these two pictures in particular because this one you see a lot of people working. This one you don't really see people, you see machines. Okay, so when you have an extensive agriculture type, like cattle ranching takes up a lot of space, a lot of times machines will do a lot of the work instead of hands-on labor. Okay, so intensive is intensive when it comes to labor. Extensive is land use, lots of land use. So examples of intensive agriculture would be market gardening. Lots of gardening is done by hand. Planting is often done by hand for a lot of these different types of crops. We're talking about like produce when we talk about market gardening. Plantation art agriculture. Plantations are basically just very large farms, but typically instead of having machines, plantations just use a lot of people to work them. Okay, if you think about like a southern plantation back during pre-Civil War America in the South, like that's a good way to remember it. Plantations still exist, not necessarily using slave labor, but plantations still exist. And then mixed crops slash livestock systems, okay? Examples of extensive agriculture would be shifting cultivation. You will learn that shifting cultivation means that you do slash and burn agriculture. You burn part of your land and you move on to another part and come back to the other burnt land later. So if you're substituting an entire field for another one, and doing that over time, that takes a lot of land. So that's extensive agriculture. Nomadic herding and ranching are also examples of extensive agriculture. Okay, this is the last slide already. All right, so populations alter the landscape, right, in farming. And that's, again, that's what we're really concerned about in this class. Like, how do people alter their environment, and how does the environment shape the way people live their lives, right? That's the theme of our entire class. So some examples of how people will alter their environment in order to produce more healthy agriculture. One thing would be terracing, which is the picture that I have here for you. This is really common in Asia. I'm trying to think of places in the U.S. that do this, and I can't really think of any. Oftentimes this is used to grow rice, which you guys are going to read about in your textbooks. Sorry, this is my third one today. I'm kind of like, it's really cool looking, but yes, obviously this hill didn't grow like that, and you'll read about what the benefits are of terracing, like why people do this. Irrigation, so pumping water from different locations and utilizing that water. That's especially important if you live in one of those drier climates that doesn't get a lot of rainfall. Lots of our farms around here in Nevada use irrigation. And draining wetlands is another way to alter the landscape. Wetlands often are built, or well, they're not built, but exist on prime agricultural land. So oftentimes those wetlands are drained and depleted to use them for farmland instead, which is a sad story because there's lots of ecosystems and wildlife that rely on that environment, and it's a sad story. Okay, so chapter 3 is really, really long. Not chapter 3, section 3 is really long, but it's not really complicated information. It's just like, here's all these different types of agriculture and why they exist, where they exist. So that's all important to know, but it shouldn't take a ton of brain power. And I think, you know, something you could do with this chart after you turn it in would be to cut it up and make little flashcards out of it. I think would be a super smart thing to study. So, yeah. Anywho, I'll see you back here for key issue 4, which I'm going to record in a minute here. So I will see you then. Whoops. Okay, there we go.